And let me introduce you to the team. So we've got Kristina. She's going to be our guest artist. She's got a really great idea to design that we're going to help her make. Leading our gaffing team is George Kennard. He'll be turning the glass. Ryan Doolittle and Eric Snee will be helping out. My name's Dane. I'm going to be talking to you all through the process. And yeah, so if you have questions, please feel free to ask. So Kristina, you're going to do a little drawing on the floor here just about what we're going to make, correct?
I am. Because normally what I do every day is I'm a flame worker. So I work in front of a flame. Some of my students are here. And having the opportunity to work in the hot shop is an amazing chance for me to work at a scale that I'm not usually accustomed to working at.
Sure.
So I'm going to do a drawing of a piece that later, when I bring it back to my own studio, I'll be able to attach parts to it.
Okay, and these will all be lamp-worked parts.
They'll be lamp-work parts. I'll also use some cast parts, kiln cast parts, pâte de verre parts that we have here. I can show everybody. And then some bronze and metal parts in order to put everything together.
Now, I was just talking with Kristina before the demonstration started, and I was asking her about a lot of her jewelry because she's got mixed media jewelry. She does all of it. So she does all of the glass working, the lamp working, all of the beads, and also all of the metal that goes around these beads. And I thought that was really neat because you have very beautiful, very exquisite jewelry.
Well, that's what I like to do, is to try to combine materials. I love the idea of metal and glass connected, and there are some things you have to be careful of because you can't always heat up the glass afterwards to make these connections.
Right, okay. Now, just to get started, to tell everybody, we are doing a large chandelier. And,
I am making a chandelier.
And this sketch right here is this going to be true to size, George? Does this look good to you?
No, I don't think this is true to size. I'm doing it so that George can see it from a distance. But
okay.
it's the shape that I'm looking for right now.
Right.
And if I can communicate to George the shape and the feeling of it, then he can make it to whatever size is going to work for him here and with the assistants.
That's great. His eyes aren't as good as they used to be. So to get started, George, he's already collected just a little bit of glass on the end of the iron, and he started a very small air bubble inside it. Now, this is all clear glass that he has on the iron. He's let that cool down to a solid state, and now we're going to add the color. So Ryan's been heating up. This is actually white, and they're dripping it right onto the tip of the bubble. Now, this is a process that we call an overlay, and we intend to have this color kind of very evenly coated the whole surface of the bubble. So what George is going to do is he'll make sure that everything is running on center. He'll take a quick reheat, and then using this table here, he'll actually kind of come over to the table with his iron up at an angle, and as he's rolling across the table, he'll bring the back end of his iron down and push forward. And this friction, it's going to smear that glass very evenly around the bubble. So we call that an overlay, and it gives us a really beautiful, kind of solid color pattern. So this right here was a piece made with an overlay, and you can see that the color is very consistent all the way throughout. Now, is anybody new to glass blowing? Is there anybody that has not seen a demonstration yet, by show of hands? Okay, great. Well, you come to a really great demonstration then. A little bit about the glass that we're working with. We're working with the world's most common type of glass, and it's called soda lime. Now, our soda lime glass has three main components. The basic component for all glass, it's sand. But we can't melt beach sand. It's just not pure enough. So instead, we use something called silica. It's mined out of the ground. You can actually find it just about anywhere in the world because it's the most abundant resource in the crust of the earth. But pure silica takes around 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, we lower the melting temperature of the glass by adding a flux. That's soda ash. And then we add a stabilizer, which is limestone. So it's these three main components that make up soda lime glass. Now, Kristina, you typically work with a different type of glass than we do. And,
I typically work with a glass that has a higher coefficient of expansion. It's an Italian glass that I use that comes in long rods. They almost look like swizzle sticks of different colors. And then I work on a flame holding those cold glass rods and then melting them and normally wrapping them around a stainless steel rod to make a bead. Some of you might have seen the flame working demonstration here at the museum, and that's typically what I do every day.
Right, okay. So you're holding right onto the glass, whereas we have to hold on to an iron that has the glass off the end of it. Now, we're not actually making a chandelier that's white. We've got another color that we're adding onto this as well.
That's right. When we were talking earlier in the week, I was asking about different colors that I could use, and these were some of the samples that were blown, and I could try to decide which color that I wanted. When this one came out, I asked if I could have something a little bit more opaque. So in trying to get it opaque, that's why the white is being put on first.
Okay. So we're doing this process of just layering the color. And once we have all the color on, that's when the fun's going to start. We'll start collecting more material. Now, we couldn't make something even a tenth as big as this drawing here with the amount of glass George has right now. So we're going to need to kind of continue to build up our, we call it gathers of glass, but we'll keep taking more and more collections until we have enough material to make the size piece.
And then when the piece is done and I have it in my hands in the studio, then I can modify the size of the beads that I use and the size of the casting and the size of the bronze that I use afterwards. So that's why it's really important to start with the blown piece for me. So it's regardless of the size that I just drew, it's more about that shape. So this is really the genesis of the idea.
So let's talk a little bit about you, Kristina. You know, I was Facebook stalking you earlier today, and I realized that you live in New Hampshire. And
I live in New
where
Hampshire.
You grew up?
I pretty much grew up in New Hampshire, in the northern woods of New Hampshire, but now I live on the seacoast.
Now, you went to school. You've got a degree from
I got a degree
University
from
of
the
New Hampshire.
University of New Hampshire, which has a very small fine art program.
Okay.
And at the time, well, even now, they don't have a glass facility. So I got a degree in sculpture, and at the time, I was carving wooden figures with a chainsaw. Completely, very distant from the glass world.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then after school, I was working in a cafe, baking bread and serving coffee. Somebody walked into the cafe one day, and he was working for Dan Daly, who is a glass artist who has pieces here at the museum.
We do have some of Dan Daly's pieces.
Yeah, quite a few.
Very well-known glass artist, and he's been around making glass for 30 years or so at least,
Definitely,
right? Yeah.
definitely. So I walked in really as a very young artist walking into his studio and worked for him for 4 years. So I got to see glass done at a very large scale.
Right.
And then one night I saw at the end of the 4 years somebody flame working. And I thought, oh my goodness, I can actually do glass by myself in my own studio on a flame. And I never realized that. So I entered into the world of flame working, and I started making beads right away.
And you said that when you started making beads, this was kind of a really special time in the States that bead making was becoming popular.
Exactly. It was in 1990.
Okay.
And that was a time when some of the bead makers around the country were coming together and communicating. And I was president of the Society of Glass Bead Makers at that, once we all came together.
From 96 until 98.
96 until 98. You read his information. That's good. And, from there I made my livelihood, and I still do, from making individual glass beads.
Okay.
And now my desire is not only to make the glass beads, but then to incorporate them into pieces, whether it's jewelry or now objects like the chandelier that we're working on today.
All right, wonderful.
Yeah.
I think that it's worth noting that in 2002, you were actually accepted as one of 4 artists that were in an exhibition. It was at the Smithsonian Museum of American Art, right?
It was at the Smithsonian Museum of Art, the Renwick Gallery. And from that exhibition in 2002, they acquisitioned a brooch. And the Renwick has just gone under a 2-year renovation. And they opened up their permanent collection, and they're putting that brooch. The brooch is on display right now. I just went to the opening last week, which was quite nice. So I feel very proud to have a piece in that museum and a piece on display here in the new wing.
So if you haven't been through our new wing, just right up here in this, We call it our minimalist white
Yeah,
box.
there's a
It's
necklace.
really-
There's a necklace on the wall that is a little bit like this necklace, but it has more color
Okay.
in it.
Yeah, so after this demonstration, you really have to go and check it out. It is a beautiful work. Well, George is well underway. He's already adding the next overlay, the next color. And working with color, it's a real challenge. You have to kind of do this again and again. And the reason is that we'll never know what this is going to look like, what the color saturation will be until tomorrow, once it's fully cooled. So we really leave a lot of that in George's hands, knowing how much color to use and how much of each color to use, too.
So is it true, because when I'm working on the torch, there are certain colors that look in a certain way. So for instance, for me, when I'm working with a red, it looks black while it's hot.
Oh, wow,
And if
okay.
I'm working with a yellow, it looks completely red while it's hot.
It is
that
like
gonna, will this look dark?
You know, I'm not sure if it will look as dark as, say, an opaque color, because I know a lot of the really bright oranges and reds, they tend to look either like a liver brown, or the yellows
exactly.
almost
They look really
like an
unattractive
orange.
while they're hot, and then they look like magic when you take them out of the kiln.
Exactly, yeah. So I think this probably, as with any color, it's not going to show its true color until it fully cools down. So although we'll be really happy to see this piece being made, we really won't get to see its true form until tomorrow morning. And that's simply because all glass that we make has to be slowly cooled. It has to be annealed. It doesn't matter whether we're making it here on stage, which we call soft glass, or working in a hot shop, or if it's made on a torch. All of this glass has to be slowly cooled. I think it's worth noting, too, we've got a really unique view. If you look up to our monitors, this is a view from the back of our reheating chamber. And a lot of people ask us, they say, what kind of camera can you put inside a 2,000-degree furnace? We haven't found one yet. There's a camera that sits behind the furnace, and it looks through a special window of glass. And this window of glass is made of something called fused silica. It's a type of glass that was developed right here in Corning back in the 1930s. Actually came upon this process to create the glass on accident. And I think one of the really great properties of this is that it's got a melting temperature over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So our 2,300-degree furnace doesn't begin to heat it up. So I think this is going to start to get a lot bigger pretty soon here.
I have patience.
You have patience, good. Well, we've got the team to do it. You know, George is really well known for making large-scale stuff, and I think
That's what I hear.
probably out of everybody that works at the museum, he's the one that's known for making the biggest stuff. So
I was pretty excited when I was first asked to do this, and we were talking about the design that I was thinking about and what object, and when I was explaining it, I was asked what size I wanted, and I kind of went like, like this. And they said, oh, we'll have George help you do that.
got just the person to do it. So you brought some other works here. I think that they were displaying them on the large screen. I think it's worth noting that you do a lot of different types of glassworking too. So this is a cast
This
goblet,
is a cast
right?
piece. And so the process here of making it is by making a wax model that looks
Okay.
exactly like this, and then making a series of plaster molds in order to then put them into the kiln and then fire it in the kiln. So you never see the glass being melted, with your own eye. It
Right,
happens
right.
in the kiln, and then afterwards there's a lot of cold working that is done. It's interesting that this piece right here was started here in Corning when I did a residency for a month.
Really?
Yeah, a couple Octobers ago. So I feel good that it's finished and it's here and it gets to be seen.
That's great. I think it's really interesting to see a different form of glassworking because, for me at least, my experience is hot shop work, and I tend to just make glass all from the end of the iron. It's all formed offhand, so I really just deal with glass. But this is a series of working with so many different materials: wax, plaster, and you probably do a few different negatives of the molds to create exactly
Yep,
what you
and
need.
then the flame working as well. So it's the concept for me is sculptural. I don't know if when we get a chance, if the camera can see this.
Can we borrow the
I
camera?
just wanted to show the idea that people can see. So if you can imagine that this is the chandelier, though it'll be in a different shape, my idea is that at the bottom of the chandelier, I'll be making something similar to this that will be at the bottom. So there'll be quite a bit of work done after in order to hold the whole thing together. And then along the edge here, there will be bronze and beads attached to it. And then up above, there'll be another part that will be bronze and pâte de verre and flame working. So that's the final genesis of the piece.
Now, it looks like George's getting ready to gather more glass or collect more glass. And right now, Eric, he's using we call it a rake, but it's just a steel plate that he's pushing across the surface of the glass inside our furnace. And sometimes in our furnace, there are bubbles that rise to the surface. So the idea is to push those bubbles to the back of the furnace. This way, when we collect more material, we don't get those bubbles inside the work. We've got a really great animation, too, and maybe we can get the AV team to play the animation in a moment. Everybody asks us what it looks like inside a furnace, so just recently we created this. But you can see up on our monitors, it's basically like a big hemispheric flower pot. It's made out of a high-fired ceramic material, and the glass sits inside there, just like honey inside a jar. So to collect the material, George dipped that bubble, that core bubble, down below the surface, and as long as he continues to rotate his iron very even, the glass spools around that bubble, and he collects, I bet you, maybe 3 times the amount that he started with. Now, we can make something larger and larger. In fact, the only thing that really limits somebody is to how large they can make something. It's, of course, how much they can handle, but just whether or not the final collection is going to fit out of our furnace door.
You know, the exciting thing for me also is because of what I do, I'm a flame worker, and I'm really interested in detail and repetition and working on this scale that is really tiny, like a micro scale. And if I'm doing something like this goblet, I need to go to a bronze foundry in order to make the parts for the bronze.
Okay.
And then I would rely on a bronze caster for that. So if I'm going to imagine something else that's big, let's say, I don't have the skills in order to blow it, like I can get here or with George.
Sure.
And then to be able to access other artists in order to complete an idea is just such a great feeling.
Yeah, it is. I love the collaboration. Now, I don't know, do you think we should gather a little more glass?
I am going to leave this totally up to George to make the decision. I am not going to dictate the size of this.
George, what do you think? Should we gather a little more glass? Sometimes George can be coerced into making larger pieces if we get the crowd really into it. And you can show him that you want him to collect more glass. All right. Well, if you didn't want to, George, I think you have to now. Now, the whole thing about collecting more glass is that we need to create this solid core that's going to support the next gather of glass. So George is using a little compressed air right now. He's cooling the bubble down. Now, our glass, probably just below 1100 degrees, it sets up, it becomes solid. And we need the glass to be solid because as soon as we go back into our furnace to collect more material, the heat of that second or third collection, it will begin to penetrate the core, and it's going to start to heat up and move around a little bit more. So it's kind of you've got to time it just right. You know, he's got to let the bubble cool down to the point where it's solid enough that he can get back over to the bench and get the glass under control before the core heats up. But if he lets it get too cold, it's just going to be wasted time. He'll spend way too much time and energy trying to reheat the core.
So there's something interesting that I never really thought of before because I've done so many things on my own in the studio that George asked me before we started whether or not he wanted me to, whether or not he was going to pop a hole in the piece at the end. And I thought to myself, oh, I'll just pop the hole in there afterwards in order to try to figure out the mechanism of hanging this.
Okay.
And I didn't even realize that it was actually something that we can do hot here. That you said it'd be easier for you to make the hole than it would be for me to do it afterwards when it's cold.
Yeah, you know, if you had to drill a hole into the glass, and you can drill glass, but you have to use a diamond bit, and you have to pour water on it the whole time. the friction of the bit coring or drilling through the glass, if it heats the glass up, there's a chance it could crack apart. And by doing it while it's all hot, that's one less step to have to go through.
Yep.
So that's less of a chance of the glass breaking. All right, so he's going in. This is the third gather. I think they like it. Now, as we start making larger and larger work, the iron, it heats up more. And we have this really great contraption here. It's something that we call a pipe cooler. It's just a trough here, and it fills up with water. So we've got a foot pedal that pumps water up into this trough, and it helps to cool that iron. And one of the great things about cooling the iron is it allows you to hold the iron closer to your body. So the closer you can keep that glass to your body, the more control you have over it. You can imagine if you had a shovel full of dirt and you were holding on to the very end of the handle, it would be very hard to control that shovel full of dirt. But if you are able to hold right next to the shovel head, you really have control of it. So the exact same concept. You know, I would, if it was me making the piece, I would probably say, yeah, that's enough glass, but I don't know. Do you think George needs to collect more glass?
Wait a minute, has he been working all day?
Has he been? He has been working all day.
Oh.
But I will tell you that he's in this state-of-the-art studio with these are air-conditioned vents. So he's been just working here in air conditioning all day. Some of us had to work outside in the blistering heat. But George has just been living the life in this beautiful studio that has air conditioning. So George, I apologize ahead of time if you didn't want to take another gather, but should he take another gather? Well, there you have it. Watching on the camera, you can see just how centered this whole mass of material is, even right down to the bubble on the inside. It almost looks like it's not moving on the screen, and that's really important, especially as you start to inflate the glass. Any inconsistencies in the wall thickness, they're really going to affect how the glass inflates, whether it inflates very even and round, or whether one side is a little hotter or a little thinner than the other. So it's important to start out with a very good foundation. If you start off with a bubble that's not even, you're never going to be able to make a piece that's very even.
It's interesting because that's the same thing with flame working.
Yeah.
On this scale, but it's really about, as I've been talking to my students all week, it's really about those foundations and setting them up along the way as the piece grows and grows and grows.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah. And I don't even think we've touched base. So you are teaching a class right now at the studio.
I'm teaching over at the studio, which is across the parking lot. And I've been there all week. It's a week-long session in bead making. So, anybody who's here can walk over and look in and see the bead making students working away.
Okay, and not only that, anybody that's here, if you're ever interested in taking a class, we teach classes from beginners, people that have never touched glass before, right up to what we call master class, people that have been doing this for their whole life. It's their career, and they're just wanting to learn more. And you've been here for some time. I mean, I've known you for, it seems like 10 years probably.
Exactly. And I've been teaching here ever since the studio opened. So I've been here for 20 years.
Wow,
The first year the studio opened, I came.
Wow.
So I'm part of the 20-year celebration. Yeah.
That's great. Look at that. All right, I think I'm going to stop harassing you now, George.
Yeah.
And then for those of you that might be interested in trying to make glass, but maybe you don't have the time to come back for a full week or a weekend, we teach other classes. They're actually little experiences where you can sign up to make a piece of glass today or tomorrow. They're usually 40 minutes long. You sign up, and you can make a number of different things. I think it's a really great experience. You know, there's somebody there. They're helping you. They're there to turn the iron and make sure that you don't hurt yourself. But you learn some really valuable things about the material, like how soft the glass is and how little you actually have to blow to inflate the material, or how quickly the tools cool the glass down. I think that that's really invaluable if you're interested in this material. Now, as we get larger and larger in scale, just the sheer surface area of the material, it's putting off much more heat. People ask us all the time, you know, do you burn yourself? And I would say that if you burn yourself often, you should probably find a new profession. But typically, you learn pretty quickly where not to touch. And it does happen every once in a while, though. And the most common way to burn yourself is just from the radiant heat coming off from the glass. So we've got a team of 4 people working here. And one of the most important jobs, I feel, is what Ryan's doing. She's just using these shields. They're just wooden paddles, and she's shielding George's arm. I find it extremely hard to focus on shaping glass when your arm feels like it's burning. So having that shield there, I think is really important. Kristina, do you burn yourself ever on the torch?
You know, it's usually if I pick up something that's too hot. So the torch is stationary.
Right.
It's clamped to the table, so I can work around the flame, like I'm working around this flame right here.
Okay.
And it's if a piece of glass or something gets put usually in the wrong location where I will pick it up by accident, or if something,
Right.
drops or falls. But other than that, it's sort of the safety of working around something that's hot.
Okay. Now, I know here it seems like we're maybe a little bit more tool intensive while we're working. I'm not sure what tools that you have.
I think it is more tool intensive. There are people who work on the flame that use a lot of different tools. For what I do, I don't. I use very limited amount of tools and mostly use gravity and the glass itself in order to make the decorations.
Right. Yeah, I find that I'll often use a tool, and every time you touch the glass with a tool, the heat of the glass, it's transferred to that tool. So a lot of times I'll pick up a steel tool and I forget that I used it just a few minutes ago, and that's how I burn myself.
Exactly, and you have to have sort of I feel it's great to have patterns that you do in the studio where you always have something hot that's away from you, always have something cold that is close to you, so that as you're working, day in and day out, you know that you can grab that without burning yourself.
Sure, yeah. I feel like so much of what we do, it's almost really monotonous. We're doing the same thing over and over again. And it's all about that repetition. It's what really makes a skilled glass worker. But sometimes you just are in the groove and you forget that you've done something. Just so to kind of set up those patterns that you do constantly,
Exactly.
It's really a safety thing.
It's safety, and then also it can free your mind, because if you're not worrying about where things are, then you can just be free to think and create when you have those movements that are automatic.
Yeah, I remember when I first started, and of course it takes such a long time to get there, but in the beginning, you're just trying to remember to turn. I was able to turn the glass and keep it pretty much on center in the very beginning, but every time I'd look away to maybe grab a tool or something, I would just stop making that connection, and I'd stop turning and the glass would fall on the floor.
Exactly, and it can be exhausting. It can be really very tiring mentally to have to think about everything all the time. And there is something that is very craft-like in this world of glass making and things that are, always being spun. The more you do it, the more you can enter into the state of being able to do it for 8 hours. When you begin, you're exhausted after 1 hour.
Yeah. Yep.
Though I must say, speaking of exhausting, when you're working with a scale and a weight like this, it brings it into another realm.
It does, yeah. So maybe George will only have him do one of these tonight.
Aren't we doing 3?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get the memo.
Well, of course.
George, are you going for another gather?
No. Are you? Seriously?
All right. All right, so this is going to get really big here. I feel like I would tip over if I was holding onto that iron. So it does seem like a lot of repetition. You know, we've just been doing this process of collecting glass and cooling the glass so that we could collect more glass. But since this is the last gather, now it's really time to start getting the glass hot, and we're really going to start to shape the material. The first thing, I think, is just to really even the shape out. So we need to make sure that everything is running on very symmetrical. And then we're going to get the heat just right. So then we're going to really try to even the temperature out, because the more even the glass is in temperature, the more predictable, the more consistent that bubble is going to inflate. Do we have questions here? Where's our question? I'll come right up to you. It's sometimes a little hard to hear. How much does this weigh? I bet you that's 20 pounds, maybe? George is a little preoccupied right now, so we'll ask him again. Oh, that was your question? Yeah, that's my guess. You have a question? Everybody wants to know, how much does that weigh? Yeah. Well. What's the biggest thing that we've ever made? You know, there was a group effort that George was the head gaffer on. And we have it here at the museum. It's kind of a seasonal thing, but every once in a while, during the holiday season, we'll get out this giant pumpkin that George gaffed. And I think this thing weighs about 73 pounds. It is huge. And we had a team of maybe 13 people working on it. So, you know, probably 5 different people just turning the iron, because the heavier the glass is, the more torque that it creates on the iron. So I'm going to talk to George for just a second, and we'll see what he thinks this weighs. Yeah, George says probably around 25 pounds or so. So that's a good amount of weight. Yeah. Sure. So I'm going to jump in here a little bit, and they're going to start to inflate the glass, and Ryan is going to help out by inflating. And while she does that, I'll help shield George's hand. You know, when you're working on this scale, it really is a collective. George, he's sitting at the bench. He's what we call the gaffer, but he really relies on his team, you know. He's got Eric helping him turn the iron, and this allows him to focus on tooling. And all at the same time, Ryan is beginning to inflate the bubble. Now, he did this a little earlier, and he might do this again. But we're going to need to disconnect this bubble from the iron at some point. We're going to need to create a weak spot, and George is heating up right next to the head of the iron to create a constriction. We call it a jack line, but it's basically this weak area that will allow us to break this glass free from the iron. All right. So our furnace here, our reheating chamber, we've got a series of doors that we can open and close, and we typically try to keep those doors closed when we're not using it, just to retain some of that heat. But we're going to have to start opening these doors. This furnace is powered by natural gas, and some of you might be able to see the burner heads. There's actually 2 burner heads on each side, so this is running on natural gas. Yep. What do you need? So I'll help out. I'm going to help George turn a little bit.
Squeeze. Flip. That's good, Eric. All right.
Got it?
Got it, Eric?
Got it?
Yep. Be on the inside of the bench.
Now, to turn this amount of glass, it's extremely hard, but to turn and have somebody using a set of tools, it's just creating more friction. It's even harder. So to have the more hands on the piece, of course, the easier it's going to be.
Blow hard. Okay, right. That's good. Nice.
All right. You know, I see that we have some glass blowers in the crowd tonight, and they're taking classes here, so I know a lot of them. And we've got this really beautiful, very elegant shape, this beautiful curve to the bowl, and it looks like a super simple shape in comparison to a lot of very complex forms, but I think this is actually one of the hardest shapes to create, to make that beautiful line that just kind of follows. And
So that's what, oftentimes the beads that I create, they are intricate. There's a lot of decoration over the surface of them, but I love a really elegant, simple form. So that's really what I'm after. And sometimes when I'm working on my own, I'll spend a huge amount of time just working on that elegant form.
this will be a great way to combine that elegance and also have the detail that you commonly put in your glass.
And it can be subtle. You know, getting a shape that is just right takes time. It just doesn't materialize on its own. Sometimes it takes quite a bit of work in order to form a shape that will be beautiful, and then afterwards the decoration can be put on it. So that's really what's happening here. It's just spending the time in order to have that shape work out to exactly something that has beauty in it.
I think also having kind of the foresight of knowing what that kind of the setup shape should be to slowly create that form.
Right.
So Kristina, what do you think about the color saturation? Do you think that the color is going to be exactly
right
what you
now
want?
it's great because the thing that I was really after was the opacity, to not be able to see through the piece. I didn't want the distraction of looking through it, and the reason for that is exactly what we just said, is the idea of the shape and the form. I want to be able to see that silhouette afterwards, and to be able to work off the surface of it, the decoration on the surface.
So that's almost a reason to kind of not inflate it maybe as much as we could. You know, if we inflate it more.
That is a point, right? Because if we did inflate it, the more you inflate it, the more transparent it becomes.
Right.
So it's really, I think it's probably going to happen afterwards when he starts to pull out the shape, where we'll pull it in and not. I also thought in the drawing here, on the edges, it depends on how I hang it, whether or not those edges are completely perpendicular or have a little bit of a flare, and that we can decide afterwards.
Okay.
Right now, it's gorgeous. I don't know if the camera work can see, but even seeing the lights here in the studio reflected in the piece
you can
is
see
just
the
gorgeous.
grid of all these lights
it's
up
just
here.
gorgeous. Yeah, it's a beautiful form.
All right. So I'm going to hop out here, and we had some questions earlier, so I'll hop out into the audience, and we can continue to answer questions. George, as always, if you need me, just yell. I'll come running back. But yeah, if anybody has questions, please feel free, raise your hands. Yeah. The purity of type of water that we're using, does that matter? We only use Corning tap water. It is the best water in the world to use. And I stand by that. I don't think it matters so much, but we do like to clean our water buckets out daily. You know, if there's some algae growing on the top of it, it's probably not the best thing to use to come in contact with the glass. So, all right, I saw one over here, so I'm going to walk down and around. And I'm counting this as my workout today, so check that one off the list. I'll get back to you. We had 2 questions up here. I think there's a question in this area. Yeah. Sure, yeah. So how much pressure is Ryan using? Right. You know, typically when you're making a piece, most of the pieces down here, the glass is soft and it inflates really easy, softer than blowing up a balloon. But because we have this much volume, it is a little bit harder. So she's probably not exhausting herself, but yeah, she has to probably blow maybe twice as hard as you might blow to inflate a balloon. We had another question. Yeah. Which pad? Oh, really interesting, actually. That pad that he's using to shape the glass with, that's our newspaper, the local newspaper, which again is the best newspaper to use to shape the glass. That's the Corning Leader. I remember the first time somebody asked me to pick up that pad and to shape the glass with it. And I said, "You're crazy, I'm not going to do that." But because the pad, that newspaper, it's wet. It's actually soaked in water. There's a thin barrier of steam that's created between the newspaper and the glass. And the glass, it kind of rides on this steam barrier, and it protects our hand from all the heat as well. So it never feels too hot while we're using that. Great question. Sir, you had a question down here? Oh, yeah. So our tables, we call them marvers, and these are made out of stainless steel. Yep, so we use steel. A long time ago, I believe they used marble, and that's kind of where the term marver comes from. Working on any scale like this, it would be extremely hard to use a marble table. One of the reasons is that the heat will crack the marble. When you're making really small pieces, it's maybe not as important because you're not going to heat up as much of that marble. And also, it's extremely expensive to find a piece of marble that big. So Kristina, when you're working on the torch, do you use anything like a marver or any kind of graphite pad?
I do use a graphite pad, and I wish I brought it. It is about this big. It's very small. But interestingly enough, I make what is known in the bead world very large beads, and I use a very small paddle. So it doesn't have to do with using a large paddle and having a large bead. It's really just that contact point that is connected there. I really like using graphite because I like how smooth the graphite flows against the glass.
Yep. Sure. And it's almost like no matter how hot the graphite is, the glass doesn't try to stick to it, which could be an issue if we were using a very small marver. Right. What do you need, George?
I'm going to put this bit on here.
Yep.
Take a quick flash, Eric.
Steady the iron.
Straight up and down, yeah.
Okay.
Can I take a flash? You're going to flash? No, you flash.
All right. So we're going to put a little button of glass here, and I'm going to help George to steady the iron. Yep. Yep. Got it? All right. You may have seen George use a little chalk. He's actually drawn a little line, a little circle on the very tip of the bubble, and that's more or less just for him visually to view where center is. You know, it's very hard, especially with such this large surface area, to drop some glass onto the very tip of the bubble and to hit center. In fact, I feel like we rarely hit center while we're doing that. It's a series of tricks after the glass is onto the bottom of the bubble that we do to kind of course it onto center. So.
Exactly. It's just always that process of correction along the way. You know, you work and you correct and you work and you correct and you work and you correct.
I feel it's the same way here. We have our set kind of rules, our procedure to make a piece, but you know, nothing ever goes exactly as planned. So it's really all about being on the fly. You have to adjust and make all these little micro adjustments.
Exactly, and that's the magic of the hands, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Very, very subtle movements.
Yeah.
So I think that this little button, it's going to be, it'll be good because it's a little added thickness. And we're going to have to attach a separate iron, an iron that we call a punty, right onto the bottom of this. And sometimes when we break the punty free at the very end of the demonstration, if it's just a little bit too thin right at the very tip or bottom of the bubble, there's a chance that it could break apart. Now, I think this is a really great tool, and you probably use tungsten every once in a while.
I do if I actually want to poke a hole in the glass.
Yep. So George is heating up this tungsten rod. He's not heating the glass, but as he heats up the tungsten, it just pushes right through that glass. It's amazing.
So tungsten is a metal that has the highest melting point of all metals. So that's why it's used for this kind of work.
Right, right. Do you know what that melting point is?
I don't know what the melting point is.
It's really hot, though.
Exactly.
We can agree on that, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah, you bet. Now, we're going to do a punty. That's what we call it. It's a finishing iron. It's the final iron that the piece will be on, allowing us to work on the opposite side. And we're going to do what we call a cold core punty. So I'll take a small little gather on this. I'm going to push all of the glass right back onto the iron. And then we'll just hang out for a bit. Once that cools down, we can take another collection over it. Now, the idea is to have this core that's solidified, and that's going to kind of give us some stability as we add this here, as we add the iron on. When we do this transfer, it's commonly a point in the process, at least as a beginner, where things can kind of go wrong. And the reason is just the temperature. It's so important to the material. So we've got to have the glass at just the right temperature. Now, while we're working with this material, we need to keep it above, let's say, 900 degrees Fahrenheit, because as the glass cools below this, it starts to shrink or contract in the surface. It's cooling faster than the core. The glass breaks apart simply because different areas are cooling and contracting at different rates. But we also have to make sure that the glass is solid. So if it's still moving around, it's never going to break free. The idea is that we're going to fracture the glass, so we need the glass to be solid to do this. You know, so we're looking for that sweet spot. I just put it back in here, so we're good to go. If you're ready, George. And you're probably wondering, how do you know what that sweet spot for temperature is? It's really just a series of mistakes. You know, we find out over a period of years and years of getting the glass a little bit too hot or a little too cold. There aren't any thermometers. There's no dials or gauges telling us the temperature. Now, the rate at which the glass cools down, it's very much dependent on the thickness of the material. If we're working something extremely thin, like a goblet, it's going to cool down very fast. That means that you're going to have to take more frequent reheats. But if we're making something that's really thick, the glass might stay hot for quite a bit longer. Now, because we're working with color on the bubble, it's really hard to see through the glass, so we can't see the thickness of the material. And it's just a series of guesses that George is doing because he's worked large like this for so long. You bet, you bet. There it is. Do you ever use a diamond-bladed file in your own work?
I use diamond-bladed files only for my metal work. No,
so
actually,
we
sometimes
score the glass with it,
Oh, right.
just to kind of create a little added insurance that the glass breaks at that constriction.
especially when it's thick like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do it a lot. I think it's something that was probably done maybe in kind of factory work. And of course, we are a glass-blowing factory town, so I think that is a tradition that's kind of carried over with us. All right, so this is all going to happen pretty quickly. George, he's attached this iron. Now, he wants to let that connection that he's just made set up a little bit, because if it's too hot and we break it free from the blow iron, it'll be really hard for him to control. So what he's doing now is he's using a tool to blow a little air on it. He's cooling that down. Now, at this point, we couldn't say, oh, the bowl is too cold, we need to go back for a reheat, because we've got two irons connected. We have to break the glass free from one of those irons. So Ryan, just to make sure that the top doesn't get too cold, she was using a torch. She was heating that area. You bet, yep. Do you want the first two sets? Yep. So we're stressing the glass. We've used the diamond file. We're adding water. This cools the glass. So it's thermal shock right on the surface of the glass.
On the rail? On the rail.
Oh,
Breaks free. Yeah, now I'm going to have to say that was pretty textbook.
that was pretty
That's
sweet.
exactly
that
what
was
we wanted to happen.
really sweet. Yeah.
This is probably going to be one of the longer reheats in the demonstration. You know, we've broken the glass free from that iron, so we had to let the glass cool down to be solid. But you know, now we want the top half of this chandelier to start to move around a little bit. You know, we've got a long way to go. We've got to stretch that glass quite a bit. So this will be one of the longer heats. And I think it's important to note that we can't just get the glass hot and turn really fast. Now, if we did that, it would flare open. It'd be kind of like a flat plate if we did it for long enough. But we're looking for a very controlled form, a really, really elegant shape. So I think we'll do this kind of a little bit slower, and it's always good to go a little bit slower
by bit
and colder.
And follow the shape, right?
I think once you go too far, if you open this up too much, it's really hard to kind of condense
bring it
that
back in.
glass back
Yeah.
down. So if you look up onto our monitor, you can see that hole that George just used the tungsten rod to drill through. So now's a great time for questions. I'm back for questions if anybody has one. Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay, so a little bit about making glass color. All colors in glass are made by adding different heavy metal oxides. Now, I'd say let's start with green. Greens, they're commonly made by adding iron oxide or rust. So you can make this green glass simply by going out to my pickup truck out in the parking lot, shave a little bit of that rust off from the bumper and throw it into the furnace. we'd have a lot of really angry glass blowers to work with, though, so I'm not going to do that. To make a blue, a really light blue, you can do that by adding copper. You can make a really dark blue by adding cobalt. And the really beautiful ruby color, that's made with gold chloride. Yes? So how do we get the glass off from the rod? You know, our irons, they're self-cleaning. Now, the glass, as I was saying earlier, as it cools, it kind of shrinks or contracts a little bit. Now, every material, it has a rate of expansion. That's what we call it, the coefficient of expansion. Now, because the steel, it cools and shrinks at a different rate than the glass, the glass just naturally kind of pops off from the iron. And you might start to hear it. You can see that we put the blowpipe in that little, we call it a hopper, but it's just a contained storage unit. So you might, in a few minutes, start to hear glass kind of breaking and popping, and it's just that glass popping off from the end of the iron. Awesome question. You know, a question that we get often, too, is can you recycle this glass that's breaking off from the end of the iron? Now, I would say that if the glass has any color on it, we probably wouldn't throw it into our furnace simply because it would change the tint of our furnace. So we try to only put clear glass inside our furnace. And all the colored glass we will recycle. We just don't reuse it here on the hot shop. Glass blowers, they were some of the earliest recyclers. They found that if you melt glass for a second time, it melts down at a lower temperature. So when we're charging our furnace, when we're adding more glass to our furnace, we'll typically add maybe 75% new glass and maybe 25% used. Yeah.
How awesome does this ever get?
How what?
How awesome does this ever get?
It's pretty awesome, isn't it? Yeah. I think that we've got a really wonderful job here. It's pretty special. And it's like this every single day. Well, we don't have you here, Kristina, but
Oh, that's very nice of you.
we still have George here, though.
No, and you know, really for me, being able to come here as a glass artist is incredibly inspiring. Because when I'm at home in New Hampshire, working in my own studio, daily I'm working by myself. It's just, you know, in and out, working on my own. So when I have the opportunity to come here and teach, or if I had an opportunity like this to have somebody help me make a piece that is bigger than the scale that I can do by myself, it is amazing. I feel like I have the best job in the world.
It feels that way, too,
Yeah.
right here. All right. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. Yep, so the question is, do these furnaces continue to run all the time? Now, we have to keep the glass furnace, the one that holds the glass in the middle of the stage, that has to keep running all the time. There is, when it's full, about 1,000 pounds, which is roughly about 10 cubic feet of glass. Now, to let that glass heat up from room temperature, it'll probably take about 5 days. So we just have to keep it running all the time. The reheating chambers that we're using, though, we've got 2 of them on right now. Those we can turn off at the end of the day. Now, the smaller one, it'll probably heat up in an hour or so. And the larger one that we're using over here, I bet you that takes about 2 hours to heat up in the morning. So we turn them off at night, and we all get here, turn on the stage, and clean the stage every morning. Yep. Yeah. Sure.
Would you ever recycle it, or since it's got color on it, wouldn't be able to?
We could, yeah. So the question is, you know, if this piece were to break or fall off the iron, could we recycle it? And the answer is yes, we could. I've actually had this happen where I've had a piece fall off from the iron, but it was at just the right temperature, where the glass was resilient to that shock of hitting the floor. So the piece actually bounced across the floor, and as long as everybody that's working with you is on the same page, and this has happened to all of us at some point in our career, everybody knows that you just need to pick the glass up off from the ground as fast as you can, because it's that cold floor that's stealing the heat from the glass. So I've seen it happen where, you know, somebody will grab a set of gloves, grab the piece, somebody will very quickly make another punty iron, attach it, and get back into the furnace before it ever breaks apart. But we're not going to do that today.
Well, it's not going to finish.
Yeah. Sure. The question is, what's the cost of raw materials? I think that right now, just the clear glass is about $1 a pound, maybe just under that. We buy our clear glass pre-melted, so it comes looking like little ice cubes in a bag. And the reason is that, pure silica, it's actually really harmful to breathe in. So by pre-melting the glass, we don't have to worry about so much of this silica in the air. So that is by far the cheapest part of this whole operation because we have to keep the furnace running all the time. And I don't want to know how much the museum pays a month to keep this furnace running. Yeah, right. I like not having that stress in my life. So it is extremely expensive. So I think that the fuel cost is one of the most expensive parts, but also color. All of the colors that we use, again, they're made with metal oxides. The ruby color, for example, it's made with gold. So the ruby colored glass is extremely expensive. Now, I think that when we buy our glass, we buy it from a company in Germany. So they're all measured in kilograms. And I think for 1 kilo of ruby color, it's somewhere around $90 to $100. And for this piece, we could maybe make 2 or 3 pieces with a kilo. So, yeah. Yep. You're welcome. Yeah.
My mom wants to know how much longer is this going to take?
How much longer is this going to take? It's going to take, just so everybody knows, his mom wants to know that. I think that this piece will probably not take longer than another 20 minutes. But it's always better. It's always better to go a little slower than too fast. This tool here, it's a really neat tool. We call it a Sophietta. It's a metal cone. There is a hole at the very tip of the cone, and that metal
Do you want me to
straw
paddle your
attached
forehead?
to it.
Are you going to do it again? Yeah.
And he was just inflating the glass here. So he's sealing up that opening and blowing up the glass. It's really important to turn at just the right rate while we're up here, especially with a piece this large. And as it gets wider and wider, you have to turn very, very slow while you're heating. If you turn too quickly, the glass starts to flare open. Centrifugal force is flaring the glass. And remember, we don't want to get wider than our shape intends to be because it's so much harder to condense the glass back again. So it's important that George, he's just turning at the slowest rate possible while still keeping the glass on center. I'm going to jump in here for just a moment, so I'll turn off the mic, but we'll be back on in just a second here. These tools here, we call them parchofis, but they're basically wooden bladed jacks. And one of the great things about working with wood is the wood, it doesn't take the heat from the glass as quickly. Now, it might allow us an extra 3 or 4 seconds of shaping, but every second counts in this process. And the wood's also soft, so it doesn't leave scratches on the glass. So George and I were just talking about how he's trying to open this, and he told me he doesn't want to pull the glass any taller or out any further away from the iron, so to just use forces lifting up and not out. Now, the angle at which we hold our tools, it really kind of determines how the glass is being shaped. So if I were to shape at an angle like this, it would inevitably pull the glass this way. By keeping the jacks really level, this is going to not lengthen the glass or make the glass taller. We turn just a touch faster.
Turn faster. And back. Stop me.
Turning just a little faster as we're tooling, we're simply using centrifugal force to our advantage, helping to create that form.
That use of white on the inside is gorgeous. The way that it makes everything opaque and then you get the transparency on the outside.
I
It's
agree.
just totally great.
It's
It's
almost
nice
like
that we
a-
get to see it actually while it's hot. It doesn't always happen that way.
Right? It's
Yeah.
almost like a backdrop for that transparent color to really pop. It gives you
Right,
so
and it'll
much
give it a little
more.
bit of making it feel like it's transparent. Through the thickness, you'll be able to
Right.
see the thickness of the glass. It's nice.
No, I think the test samples that we made earlier, that was a kind of an opaline white, so it was like a transparent white.
Right.
And I think this is a really great decision on your
Well,
part.
it's nice because when you're doing something that's so large, it's really important to do all the little steps to get ready for it. You know, I'm talking through that with my students in order to get the colors right before you invest the time and energy into
Right,
something,
right.
making something that's big. Yeah.
So start small and then grow
Build,
bigger,
build,
a little
build,
bit at a
build. Yeah.
time. George, are we opening this again?
Close that lip up. And back. And back. And back.
All right. Yep. Do you want me to grab from the other side? You do this side or?
Just run both sides.
Okay.
Kristen needs a break.
Sure. Oh yeah.
I wonder, just gonna get the lip hot, start to like really open up. Open. And back. And back. A little faster. Back.
Do you want to be closed in? Both sides?
Just keep right open so it looks like it's C.
Yep. Is that good for you? So George just said to keep one of the doors open just a little bit, having that little sliver will allow him to see the glass and make sure that he's not changing shape as he's turning.
And back. Faster. And back.
So you can see that lip, it's opening up wider and wider every time he comes back to the bench. And he's focusing on the bottom of this bowl right now. He's kind of setting it up. Every time he touches the glass with that paper, it chills the glass. It helps to maintain that form that he has. Do you want to next size up, George, or will we wait? Do you want the next size up for doors, or?
Yeah, I want to wait for the last spin.
Okay.
Open. And back. And back.
I think one of the challenges of making this shape is that we have to keep the glass warm. Even that glass that is the punty, all the solid glass on the iron, if that cools down too much, the whole piece could fall on the floor. So we have to keep that warm, but we've got the back half of the bowl the shape that we want it. So, of course, we need to keep that warm, but we're trying to balance our heat, not letting it get too hot, just so that we can maintain that shape. And we do that a number of different ways, either by cooling the glass in certain areas with a tool, or using a torch to heat certain areas of the glass. And it's really just all about that temperature management. Yep.
Left slider over here. This other side, Dave.
Okay, right behind you.
So Ryan, close the left side. Get on the slider on the right, Ryan. Then you got the hook. Can you reach in there, buddy?
I got it, yeah.
Grab a hold for it with the hook. There you go. Now stand farther over there. Push forward. Push forward. Yeah. Yep. Open. Back.
Is that good for you, George? right, so Kristina says she really likes the shape. We're going to open it just a touch more. Is that?
I love the way that it's been looking all along the process.
Yeah.
But I feel like, you know, it's like we're getting closer and closer and closer and closer, and it's just like, where do you say stop, and where do you say, you know, this is enough, and then
Right.
where do you keep on going? So it's really a communication. You know, in the end, George has got to be able to say, this is where it's at.
Sure.
Okay.
And stop.
All right, so we're just taking a flash heat, right? It's just a quick little flash. George is going to take over. He'll continue to heat the lip.
Going on the outside with the jacks. Gotcha. Long turns. A little faster. Like you have that.
So for this final shape, George is going to step outside the bench, and he'll have Eric turn at the bench. He's going to use a set of wooden bladed jacks as parchovies on the lip. Or he said maybe he'll use the paper. It's really up to him, and he'll just assess the situation once he sees it from that outside angle. Okay? Got it. Got it? All right, so the final step of making any piece of glass, it's annealing the glass, cooling the glass down. Now, we're going to have to set this inside a 900-degree oven. So Eric has got the job of putting this piece inside there. And it's a pretty hot job, but he's got the right tools to do it. We've got a reflective suit. This is going to help protect his body from all the radiant heat. He's got a set of gloves that he'll be wearing. They're Kevlar gloves. His gloves are lined with wool, and they'll keep his hands comfortable for a good minute or so. So this is going to have to happen pretty quickly. Don't worry, we've all done this many times before. Yep.
How do you want to do it? Give me a second. Yeah.
Ryan, will you grab the left side door and I'll grab the right? Okay. All right, here we go. We're going to stress that punty connection. Eric's ready to grab a hold of the piece. Just like transferring the glass onto the punty, George uses a diamond file. He scores the glass. A few drops of water. Stress that glass, thermally shocking the material.
Back, Dane. Get ready, back towards me.
Okay? And it's that one tap on the iron, the vibration that's going to help break the glass.
Pick it up there. There. Got it?
We're going to put this one away. Let's still give it up for our team. Kristina Logan, George Kennard, Ryan Doolittle, Eric Snee.
Sorry about that.
I'm sure the next one's going to be even better and maybe even a little bigger.